you know, I'll say this, I never knew a lot of dulcimer players. When I first started playing, there were not a lot of dulcimer players around. And so I started seeking them out and seeking out albums, and I found Howie Mitchell was on that Golden Ring album, Folk Legacy, and there was, George and Jerry Armstrong. There were different ones that played the dulcimer. But Howie Mitchell was interesting in that I'm not sure about exactly, but he's the first one I heard who really did intricate chordal arrangements on the dulcimer. And he also was doing banjo techniques, hammer-ons and pull-offs. And I didn't know what he was doing. And so I actually ended up going down to Washington, D.C. This is interesting. I worked with a woman in Cambridge, Mass., who had Howie Mitchell as a high school teacher, and she needed somebody to help her drive a car back from Washington. So her mother flew us both down there so that I could drive her back to Boston. And I said, I'll do it if you'll introduce me to Howie Mitchell, because they were friends. And anyway, so I actually got to go over and meet him, and he showed me. He said, "Yeah, this is how you do. I do that." I just said, "Well, how do you do that song?" And he did, that was how he did Soldier's Joy, and that was cool. And we did some finger picking stuff, and and he showed me about, I looked at it, and that was very interesting. I adapted the one string method that he did, and then I met Margaret MacArthur and went to a camp up in Vermont with the Boston Folk Song Society, and they had a weekend. They had a dulcimer workshop. I said, "Oh, I'm taking that," and it was Margaret MacArthur teaching. And I went, and I was the only one there. It was just me and Margaret, and she played a beautiful cross-picking style, and she played across the strings, and her music was she had very beautiful, like old man fiddle arrangements. That's what I call them. I mean, not that you'd have to be an old man. I mean, just an old country person. And she played that style, but her approach to playing each note with this hand influenced my playing. At the time, I didn't do that. At the time, I played with a noter, and so we ended up just trading tunes, kind of. And years later, it was kind of, I was up at that Dulcimer days in Vermont, however many years ago, 5 years ago or so, and it turned out that Margaret actually passed away a few months later, maybe just a month later. But we went over to her house and visited, and we figured out that was, in fact, her first time teaching, and it was my first time going to any kind of a dulcimer thing. And so that touched me. I mean, because she was a great player. And so anyway, that's kind of but other than that, I never learned from dulcimers. I mean, those were my dulcimer lessons right there, pretty much. I think I might have went to a woman, Mary Faith Rhodes. I went over to her one time up in Cambridge and I said, "Well, I want to see if I do this right." And she was into this chordy stuff, kind of after the Howie Mitchell style, and she was very good. But I'm kind of single-minded. I mean, you have to be to get into the old traditional stuff and stick with it, nothing else. And I was doing noter style at the time, and I said, "Well," she said, "If I were you, I wouldn't touch it." And I stuck with what I was doing, and she was very encouraging and very nice, and so that was but that was about it. That's all the dulcimer I ever studied, and the rest of it was play with fiddles, just sit there and whack away. Of course, people don't realize this. The older dulcimers weren't loud like these, and a lot of them weren't as, some of them didn't even note out exactly right yet. Back in the 70s, I mean, I got mine in the 60s. Those instruments were soft. I could sit in the middle of a fiddle jam. I could be in the wrong key. They couldn't tell. You couldn't hear it. So I'd whack away, and I got the music in me, and that's how I learned. So that I suggest try that instead of tabs sometime. Go hang around with fiddle players. Anyway.